Hey, what's up, everybody? We are now live on today's Impactful Writing Podcast, writing and storytelling lessons from 2020. Some of them are shocking, by the way. I put that in the graphic. I put shocking lessons, and some of them were shocking, at least to me. And then also, we're going to talk about some writing and storytelling goals for 2021. I'm Jay Shear. He's Caleb Monroe. And this is the Impactful Writing Podcast, which is produced by the Reclamation Society and is part of the Story Geeks Network. How you doing, Caleb?
I am doing well. I think I mentioned last time that we mentioned last time that I would be in London come this episode, and my wife and I are settled in and
awesome
to the apartment we've stayed in before. So it's kind of got a little bit of that home feeling, and it's actually been very nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad you can work remotely. Working remotely is. I've grown to really enjoy working remotely, actually, because of right now I'm working not from my home studio. So it's just really nice to be able to do that kind of stuff. Always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. But let's just get into this. We're going to get into these writing and storytelling lessons. 2020 was such a unique year. And then obviously, so what did we learn from it? What storytelling and writing lessons did we learn from 2020 being such a chaotic time in many ways? By the way, it hasn't really stopped in many ways either. We'll also talk about 2021 goal setting, because I know that that's something that you're really passionate about. You have a lot of goals. What's funny is I haven't done as many goals in my writing career as I have in my business career. So I'm actually I've studied how to set good goals for years and years and years, and I apply them sometimes to my writing. So it'll be interesting to see how this conversation flows with that kind of.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah. Anything else we need to touch base on before we jump into this?
I don't think so. I think we're ready. I guess Happy New Year to anyone who's listening. This is our first episode of January of 2020.
Well, we had one. We had one on what was it, January 4th?
Did we? Oh yeah.
Yeah,
See,
we did.
I'm so confused about what time it is and what.
Well, in that show you had just arrived, so you were still jet lagged in that show. So
it was the morning after we flew in. It was the morning after. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I have turned 40 since we last talked.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, I guess
I'm looking down the barrel of 42 this summer.
Oh, well, I don't know. I never thought I would see 40. So that's another shocking lesson from 2020 that I actually got to achieve 40, which is crazy. So let's just jump into this.
Right.
What was the first lesson? And we'll just go back and forth. I'll do a lesson, you do a lesson, and we'll just keep going through this. What was the first lesson you learned in 2020 about writing and about storytelling?
A lot of the lessons that I learned are going to be sort of more about the life behind the writing than the actual writing itself. I learned a lot about the writing itself, and I'll share that. But what I learned is that writing was both kind of the hero and the villain of my year, as far as the ups and the downs. Both, a huge percentage of them came out of my writing life. And that was something that I came to realize in December as I sort of looked back on the year. But then this year I tried something new. It's something I picked up from Tim Ferriss, and he's been doing this for 5 years or so, or at least he's been talking about doing it for 5 years. And instead of setting goals for the new year, he does a past year review where he goes through his calendar and everything he did in the previous year and jots down the things that had a positive impact, the people, the activities, the commitments, and the ones that had a negative impact. Then he tries to eliminate the 20% of the most negative, and then he tries to the 20% of the positives that had the best impact on his year, he tries to put on his schedule for the coming year and to lean more into those. So I thought that was an interesting approach, and I spent this past week doing it, and it confirmed that. I'll share some more lessons in a little bit, but it confirmed that writing was both leading the pack in positives and negatives. So it was a very mixed experience, and I don't think on any given day, I don't think I really realized that both of those things were going on. One of them tended to be in my consciousness at a time, but they both were really there the whole time.
Yeah, that's cool. Mine is sort of similar, but it's a little bit more nuanced in this regard. I was actually a little bit shocked. This is one of the things I was shocked by when I say that I had some shocking lessons from storytelling in 2020. And one of those was the impact that storytelling has is really, truly immense. And what I mean by that is in 2020, a lot of people started to believe a lot of different things. And I have friends who, whether they were on, if they were, leaning left or leaning right, or if they were, farther right or farther left, whichever side of the spectrum that they were on, stories impacted their life in really, really, really critical ways. So in order for a story to work, you have to believe the story, right? Like, in order for anything to work, it has to be believable to you. The characters have to be characters that you would feel like you would see in real life. It has to align somewhat with challenging the way that you have previously believed, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, it can just entertain you and it can just be escapism. But if it's really having an impact on you, then it has this way of getting into your brain and almost like rewiring the way that your brain works in a lot of ways. And I was really shocked at the impact that the storytelling had on the general populace in 2020, because I will talk to a lot of my friends now, and not only have their beliefs shifted throughout the course of 2020, but they've become more solidified. They have become, and I'm talking about, so when I say storytelling, I'm not necessarily saying they went to see a Marvel movie and it changed their life. But what I'm saying is their brains were rewired to think about stories in a way that I don't think they had previously thought about them. So whether it was, wow, I now believe a lot of the conspiracy theories are true because I saw this thing on Jeffrey Epstein, and then we saw what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. And a lot of that is information that you don't have a full grasp of, right? However, what the brain is so powerful to do is create a story around it. Now, I'm not saying that those stories are false. I'm not saying that those stories are true. Because again, you can look at the spectrum of stories and everybody believes something different. But what it does to me is it tells me that when people believe the stories and then I have a conversation with them, they've begun to actually act on them. They've changed their behavior and their thought patterns because of the stories and because of what they choose to believe. And I say choose because belief is a choice. I don't think a lot of things when I talk to somebody, I'm like, you believe that? And they go, yeah, I believe that. And I go, okay, well, you're choosing to believe that, but I'm not choosing to believe that. So I don't think it works that way. And by the way, neither of us can prove the other one wrong, right? It's like an atheist having a conversation with a person of faith who believes in God of any religion. You could be like, well, I believe in God. And I go, I don't believe in God. Okay, there's evidence you could probably present evidence on both sides of that equation that backs up what story you're choosing to believe. And the impact of that, to the point where, we saw in late December, what you believe in terms of stories is going to have you act, right? It's going to have you act as you go to protest, you go to, storm the Capitol building. These are stories that you have believed and internalized. I'm not saying they're false. Because we saw BLM, we saw politics, we saw whatever side of the aisle you're on. But those stories are things that people chose to believe or not. And we saw that in the fake news, and we saw that in the false information. And so what it does to me, what it tells me, I'll just stop by saying what the lesson is. The lesson is that I have to be as responsible as possible in order to tell stories, because I don't want to create any situations where I am being irresponsible and causing people to believe and then behave in some different way. And that was kind of shocking to me that we got there so quickly. And my next lesson, I'll talk about how I think we got there so quickly, but I'm going to kick it over back to you. What's another one?
Yeah, I think you're right in that part of what 2020 helped reveal, this was always true because this is how human brains work, but part of what 2020 helped reveal is how much behavior is affected by the narrative that you believe you're a part of, or the story that you're telling yourself. Before 2020, I think a lot of that was internalized and subconscious. We weren't making a lot of connections between the narrative we thought we were in and our actions. But I think 2020 really showed how much our actions and our activity in the world is influenced by the story that we think we're part of. Yeah, that was a big one. So just to get a little more, this is probably the most writing specific of the things that I learned from last year. But towards the end of the year, as I was sort of reflecting back on the year, writing wise, as a writer, and as I was traveling in December, I was thinking about the previous year, and I felt disappointed. I felt like I had done a lot less than I wanted to do. I felt like I hadn't gotten much done, things like that. But then in these past couple of weeks, as I went through what I actually did and listed them, I was really surprised by how much I got done and how many of them I had forgotten. It was only when I went through my journal and my calendar that I remembered, oh yeah. So I'll just tell you some of the things. So I wrote over 20,000 words of a book. Nice. I assembled 3,600 pages of notes toward another thing that I'm hoping to write one day.
3,600?
Yes. Those are notes I've taken over the past 15 years, but I finally assembled, got them together into some order. I made 96 magazine submissions with short stories and received 96 rejections. I wrote and rewrote 13 20-minute video scripts. I wrote 13 new comic series pitches and sent those off to a publisher. I wrote 7 short stories, began several others. I wrote 3 film treatments. I revived 2 dormant comics projects. I wrote a short comic pitch, a short comic script, and I polished a TV pilot. And that's a pretty, the idealistic side of me would love for that list to be longer. But when I look at that list, I'm satisfied. But I wasn't satisfied when I just thought through it. I had to actually make the list of everything that I had done. And the human brain has a negativity bias, which means that we remember the negative parts of something more than we remember the positive parts of something. Physically, we remember the negatives better. And that's a survival trait, so that you remember, oh yes, that berry made me sick. And it's important that you remember that more than the berry that didn't make you sick.
Don't touch the pill.
So when we look at our own lives, we tend to, our memories skew negative. And so when I was just thinking back over 2020, I was disappointed and I had a negative view on what I had accomplished. But then when I listed it out, I actually felt productive and pretty positive. And I was kind of laughing at myself, like, how did I forget that I did that thing? Like, that's not a small thing. And I just totally forgot that I did it. The 20,000 words on a book that I did, I really forgot that I did that because it was early in the year. And, that's nothing to sneeze at.
Not at all. Yeah. I think that it's really positive, and this is maybe this is a lesson that I am still learning. I think you've learned this lesson better based on the conversations that we've had. But I think it's really, really positive to celebrate the work that you have done, right? And that's not even like a shocking thing to say that you should celebrate me. Like, literally, if you read the Genesis creation account, whether you believe it's true or not, it doesn't matter. What it shows is that God celebrated his work, right? And I don't do that very well. I usually celebrate my results more so than I celebrate the work. And I think that that's negative. And I think we should spend more time, because I think like if you told me to go back and look at all the things that I had done, I'd be like, oh, I'm very satisfied, just like you just described when you mapped it all out. I'm very satisfied with what I did. But if you ask me, like, well, how many book sales did you make, or how many this did you do, or how many that did you do, I would be like, oh yeah, now I'm frustrated because I want to do more. But if the work itself is good, if the work itself is inherently good, it should be celebrated, right? Or if it's even bad and you learn something from it, like, oh, this was horrible. I didn't need to learn to write better. That's fine too. Celebrate the fact that you got out what you got out and then move on from it. I love that. That's a great, I want to do that now.
I think you should. I think every writer who's listening should.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So what was your next?
By the way, if anybody watching or listening has any suggestions for us, you can either if you're live, type them into the comment. If you're listening to this back on the Story Geeks podcast, then definitely shoot us an email or shoot us a note in the Story Geeks Facebook group or something, and let us know what some of your major learnings about writing and storytelling lessons that you've learned in 2020. That'd be great. My next one piggybacks on my first one. So my first one being the impact of storytelling, and more so than that, how the human brain is wired to. Stories can sort of, I think, push you in a direction, but the brain has to accept and believe in the direction that the story is prompting you. And it has to fill in information, because there is not as much information about life as we would like there to be. Just think about it from writing. Just think about writing a story about an event that happens, and then think about writing it from multiple different character perspectives. Right? This person's point of view, this person's point of view, this other person's point of view. Each one of those people will likely see the events unfold differently in some way, shape, or form, because they're going to put emotions on top of what happened. They didn't notice some of the things that other people noticed. They were not prompted by some of the things that happened. So I bring that up because even if you think you have all of the information, you may only have one perspective actually on how the information played itself out. And since none of us have this, omnipresent drone that just flies over situations and sees every single angle and sees every single piece of detail as it unfolds, it's very difficult for us. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is the brain has to participate in order to believe something, in order to say, like, that's a story and I believe that story. The brain has to participate. And that's sort of what I was saying in the first example. But the second lesson is the audience's state of mind has a lot to do with what they will choose to believe or not to believe. And that is something that I have always not given enough credibility or credence to, because especially as somebody who, we called this the Impactful Writing Podcast because you and I want to have an impact, right? And I think most writers do. And if we want to have an impact, then we need to know where our audience is at before we start telling the story to them. Because if we start telling certain stories, they're going to be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so I bring that up because we've had an increasingly polarized last decade. And over the course of this little tiny polarization, we started to collect information from different sources. And there's a plethora of information now available to us. There's a plethora of stories now available to us. We can choose to escape and go to comic books. We can choose to escape and go to, independent films. And there's just lots of places for us to collect stories, whether they're real life stories or whether they're, just fanciful stories. But I did not expect that in 2020, once we saw the impact of the pandemic, I did not anticipate what isolation would do to people's brains. If you would have told me that isolation would cause people to start to invest in stories in different ways, I would have said that makes a ton of sense to me. But the practical application of it I didn't understand that would happen as much. I did not find that even myself, and by the way, I'm pointing the finger at myself and all this stuff too. I did not realize that I would start to go, oh man, my friends who are choosing to have parties during the pandemic, I don't think they care about me anymore. Now, granted, they didn't tell me they didn't care about me. I interpreted that they didn't care about me because, I've talked about this before, but if my wife is in a vulnerable population and we have to keep it locked up and you have parties, I can't see you. So you must not care about seeing me if you're going to have parties, right? These are the kinds of things that would go through my mind. Isolation start to have us tell ourselves stories, because again, we're only seeing one piece of information and our brain is filling in the rest. And so I think is, how do I internalize that to storytelling? I think that it means that if you want people to follow what you're trying to say in your story or in your writing, you need to have the breadcrumbs laid out in such a way and know where your audience mind is when they start to invest in the story, so that when their brain engages with the story and when their brain starts to follow a thought pattern, it goes in the right direction. And I saw this a lot of times with the Story Geeks podcast. We'd get together for the Story Geeks podcast and someone would say, oh, this movie that we watched together, I really feel it was saying this. And I was like, how did you get there? Because I watched the same movie and I thought it was saying this, this, and this, and I can point to the evidence of this, this, and this. And they go, well, what about this other evidence of this, this, and this? And then we have this long discussion about what the movie was actually trying to say, what the movie was actually trying to impart to those audience members who were participating in it. And I think that the audience's state of mind, you're never going to be, you can't control that. It's not a variable of your story you can control. Which means that ultimately, when they put down your book or when they turn off their TV, you cannot control what went on. You can only influence, right? You can only influence what went on in their brains. You cannot control it, and that to me speaks to the importance of for storytellers and writers to go back to the premise, go back to your concept, go back to the little details that you have included in the story. Have you included details that make people start to believe something that at the end of the story you'd think would be horrible if they believed? Just check those things. You're not going to be able to control it 100%, but checking those things is really, really important based on where the audience is showing up to your story.
Yeah, I'm seeing a common thread in both of your things so far, which is the idea of the difference between product and result. That there are things you can control as a writer, right. The words you choose and the story that you tell, but you have no control over the result. You can't make anyone like it, anyone buy it. You can't make anyone understand it. It can be so clear to you and no one gets it, and there's nothing you can do about that. And that's when we talk about setting goals. When we get to talking about setting goals for the coming year, too many people make the mistake of setting goals that are results oriented, which are things that are out of their control. Mm-hmm. When you set goals for things you can't control, for how many sales you make or how many reviews or how many sales, sales to like a market versus sales to an audience, you can't control any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so then there's nothing you can do to either meet that goal or not meet that goal. So you have to come back to the product and the process when you're setting goals. And you do your best. You do your best to make it something people want to buy. You do your best to make it something people understand. You do your best to make it something that will make people think in a certain way or feel a certain thing. Right. But at the end of the day, it's completely out of your control,
Yeah, and what's so cool about that is I oftentimes put on my producer hat, right? And the producer has to think about some of those other goals you mentioned, because the producer, by definition, has a monetary investment. Not that the writer doesn't. I'm not suggesting the writer doesn't, but the producer has a monetary investment on top of the writer. But what's so cool about what you're saying, and what's so great about concentrating there when you have your writer's hat on, is that then you get to focus on craft. And there is nothing better than focusing on craft. As a producer, let me tell you something. As a producer, I hate focusing on producer stuff. I would much rather be a craft person all day long. And that's where you get to really, really invest in that craft. And that's a really good point.
And there's a craft to producing, right? You can set a goal that says, I will do these 3 things that I think will grow my audience. But again, you can't grow your audience. You have to come back to the craft of the thing that you're doing. You ultimately can't do the other parts,
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah. So my next thing, and this is putting on, I guess, my reader or viewer hat, is there were only 2 things that had more positives in 2020 for me than writing. The very first one was social stuff, just conversations with friends, experiences with people, or my wife and I, our apartment flooded. So we spent the first 9 months of the year living with friends, and just like family dinners and things like that were just those were positive experiences. So that was my number one source of positive experiences. But the second most, and they overlapped because so many of these were both, was movies or books or TV shows that I just really enjoyed. Awesome. And so many of those were done with people, like after family dinner, we would go watch a movie or something like that. Yeah. And so that also brings home to me the fact that writing doesn't go out into a vacuum. You can't control what happens, but you can have tangible effects on people's lives. You can make a bad day a good day. You can, you know what I mean? Things like that. And I don't think there's a craft lesson there so much as a mindset lesson, but just to think back on all of the positive experiences that you have had in the past year, movies that you just loved. It was just so exciting to watch them, or a documentary about a shared experience that you were able to really connect with someone over, things like that. Just think back on all of that, and it really informs your mindset about the fact that in some ways it's an ethereal art form. Yes, it has less and less tangible forms as we move forward in technology, but it can have tangible emotional, spiritual, psychological effects on people. Can make a day a good day, a day that gets remembered on a list of positive things at the end of the year, for me. So, and part of that too is just I'm wired that way. I love stories, which is why I want to tell them. So, not everyone's going to have that same level of positive experiences just from a story that they watched by themselves, but it still happens to all of us.
Yeah, that's awesome. In fact, I'm going to switch. I had mine ordered separately, but just to piggyback off of yours, when you talk about being social and participating in storytelling, whether you're watching or whether you're doing what I have on mine, which is collaborating with other people to tell a story or to get better at it, right? Some of the best experiences I had, I should say, in 2020 were when I was collaborating with somebody, whether it was us on this podcast, whether it was me, now these days I'm kind of a guest on the Story Geeks podcast because I'm not on that podcast as much, or whether it was collaborating with my writing partner and storytelling partner, Nathan. We had a storytelling brain trust meeting at the beginning of 2020. Of course, everything changed after that meeting, but that was, to be able to converse with people about both the process of storytelling, but also the stories, like you said, that we see around us. I think that I have a lot of conversations because my wife and I don't have kids, so we have a lot of time with one another because we both work from home. So we have a lot of time to process, sometimes too much time to process, because sometimes we'll spend like 2 hours talking about a news story that we heard. And it's like, whoa, why did we spend that much time? And it's because we really like to process things. But those types of conversations are really impactful to me because it allows for nuance to take place in what I'm believing and what I'm investing in and why I was put on this earth and what purpose does my existence have and what's important about my existence. And so I would say collaboration, and that is collaboration in trying to figure out what's true, collaboration in trying to figure out what stories were the best things that we saw this year and we're really excited about, collaboration in saying, what was great about this story and what could have been improved, collaboration in the actual telling of the story itself. That was really, that's always a really, really high point for me too. So similar to yours, just slightly nuanced differently, but collaboration was big.
Yes. Yes. I Well, first I'm going to say, because I don't know why I didn't. Oh, because it wasn't writing output, but I had a film come out, and you had a full cast audiobook come out. We both had big releases in the past year, so I'm just going to, while we were talking about not being good about celebrating, I'm going to bring that up and just say that was pretty great too. That was a great. Each of us had a great release last year, and I think that's big and that's important. So I just wanted to just throw that out there before it just like went past and we didn't mention it. But
oh yeah, I'm actually going to mention it, and before we talk about goals, I'm going to mention it again because
okay,
I think that there are even more things to celebrate. But yeah, we'll cover it for sure.
Yeah, and then I think this is really the last thing that I've got on my list as far as looking back at the year before. But as I looked at all the things that I got done, I also listed sort of the writing adjacent things in my life. And so that includes the movie coming out. That includes this podcast. That includes getting some artists attached to comics projects, but that's a whole separate thing than me actually writing the scripts.
Right.
And it includes writing related education. So when I looked back at 2020, I realized that I completed a screenwriting mentorship. I attended an in-person workshop in February before the world shut down. I attended a virtual workshop, and then I did 10 online workshops somewhere in that neighborhood. I joined 2 writing groups.
Nice.
And what I realized is that those spaces, the writing related education spaces, where I'm trying to make my craft better, they also contributed hugely to my productivity. Many of those stories were written for an assignment for a workshop or because I needed something to turn in, and so if I hadn't been in these workshops or in these writing groups or in this mentorship program, if I hadn't sought those things out and made them part of my life, then that list of things that I wrote last year would have been maybe half as long, because so much of it was done for the sake of that, for the sake of developing my craft, but also for the sake of community. I guess where you were saying collaboration, I think conversation. Just the fact that I needed something to say in those spaces. I needed something for someone to respond to. And yes. And then this podcast, which is a little different, but similar in that this is a dedicated space where I just every 2 weeks, I get to try to clarify something about writing that is probably not clarified in my brain yet, Yeah. And that I think has also contributed to my growth as a writer, and also has made me want to, we talk about something and then I want to go try it, and so that also spurs the productivity. So I think the final lesson that I learned was that put yourself in these education conversational spaces, because they will lead to productivity. Even if you have a year like I did, where I set no writing goals last year. I had no goals for the year. Yeah. I was just just wanted to write more. But by putting myself into those spaces and trying to get better at what I do and trying to clarify my thinking about how writing works, I ended up also creating a lot for those spaces or through those spaces. So I guess my recommendation for people, the action item is find a writing group. If you don't have one, look for workshops. If you haven't done any, there's a lot of good free ones. There's a lot of good cheap ones. There's plenty that you can pay substantially for as well. But put yourself into those spaces, because they will make you have to create stuff and make you have to clarify your thinking on things.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. I think that it's interesting because I do not think that we as humans can get as far alone as we can get together at all. Like there's no question that in my mind that's true. Like we have different giftedness, we have different experiences. I I don't know if this short film will ever see the light of day, but I wrote a short film at the beginning of the year. I ran it through the Storytelling Brain Trust, which is Caleb, Mike Rowe, and Victoria Hansen. We've only had a chance to meet once, but Caleb specifically, everybody gave me great feedback, but Caleb specifically went through and took out a lot of the dialogue because there was subtext there. There wasn't the extra dialogue was not necessary, and I know for a fact that the subtext is often lacking in my dialogue and in my writing. Well, the script will not be as good unless Caleb looks at it and says, "Hey, there could be way more subtext. Like, you just take this out. Like, you don't really need it." And so that does two things, right? That improves my craft because now I can look for it the next time I'm actually writing something. But it also improves the actual story that is going to reach the people that it intends to reach. So I think, whether it's collaboration, whether it's just conversations, whatever, it's just really important to get together with other people. It's part of the human experience. And as writers, I think we have this dream. I don't know that we have this dream, but I think a lot of people have this dream of like, we're going to be Stephen King sitting on like in the woods by ourselves at a typewriter, and like next thing you know, we're going to have 20 movies that, and I don't think that that's actually how the process works, right? Even the journey from having a book to being a published book with a publishing company to then turning itself into a movie, that's hundreds of people. We're talking about hundreds of people that touch these projects. So collaboration and relationships are important.
But I will say that you have to figure out for yourself at what point it becomes helpful.
Yes.
For me, I need to finish a script before I have people talk to me about it. I need to have done my thing and tried it. Otherwise, their voices are echoing in my head. If I show them 10 pages, and then as I write the next 90 pages, I got their voices in my head, which means my voice is not what's coming out in the story. But other writers, I know other writers who they won't start a story till they call a fellow writer and talk on the phone about the story for like 2 hours and work out all the details, and then they go sit down and write it. Yeah. Everyone has a different point at which that relationship and that communal and conversational aspect, where it becomes a positive, where it helps your work. But there's also a point, anything before that point, where it can hurt your work. So you need to figure out for yourself and your own workflow and just how you're wired, at what point to bring that stuff in order to create the maximum positive impact on your work.
Great point. And I could do an entire podcast on this. In fact, maybe someday we should, but I just want to bring out something that speaks exactly to what you're talking about. And this is not just for writing. This is for any problem you're trying to solve in life. And that's a bold statement, but I can't think of another way to say it. When you seek feedback and when you seek wisdom from other people, which you should do, which we just said, we both agree you should do. A lot of times the human beings are wired to respond to people by actually trying to solve their problem for them. And so what happens is I go to Caleb and I say, Caleb, can you, and actually Caleb's pretty good at this because he told me, he said, I made some edits to your dialogue. Do you want to see them? So he actually asked me about it, which is, I think, if you can have mentors that do that for you, mentors and collaborators and friends and family, whatever, if they can say to you, well, hey, I've got some ideas. Do you want to see them? And Caleb knows to ask that question because Caleb just said why he asked that question, because he doesn't want to put his voice in my head. But you can avoid it on your side if someone just blurts out, here's what I would do, by noting their solution and then asking them, what do you think the problem was with what I had written, with what I had done, that resulted in you finding that particular solution? Why are you doing that? What was it about the story itself that you found a problem with? Because as a writer, you're not really, most of the time, you're not really asking for, can you just give me a solution? You're usually asking for, what about my story caused you to think that way? Or what about my story caused you to feel that way? And once you understand how that person thinks or feels, you have an external perspective. And now, though, you can go back with your own perspective into the work and say, Now I know what the problem actually is. And now I'm just bringing my solution to that problem. I'm not bringing their solution to that problem, because you know the story you're trying to tell, you know what you're trying to accomplish. So in the event that someone is not as kind as Caleb and doesn't say to you, do you want my solution? Then I think just take the solution. But then, because I think the natural thing is to go, ooh, I reject that solution because it's not really what my character would do. And now I feel bad about my story, and now I'm self-conscious. Check those feelings at the door, push them aside, and go, what made you say that? Like, what was it about the story that made you think this way about this character or feel this way about this character? Because chances are you can make some very small tweaks. They're probably going to suggest something, by the way, that's a very giant tweak to your story. Other writers probably won't as much because they're more nuanced in the way that they make solutions, or they refer you to things. But your audience will be like, what if you did this? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But when they tell you what the problem is, you'll go, oh, I'll just do this, this, and this. And usually that fixes it, or after several iterations, you're able to fix it. So I really like that. That's good.
Sometimes you'll hear that called the note behind the note.
Yes.
Notes, when people give you notes or feedback, what they're usually presenting to you is a list of solutions.
Exactly.
But you have to figure out what problems they're trying to solve with those solutions. Sometimes you can ask them, but sometimes you can't. It's like a producer or a director or an editor or someone just sends you an email, and you've got it, and you're like, okay, but what are they really wanting me to address?
Right.
That is not it. I'm not going to do that because that's going to hurt the story. But they're suggesting that because they're bumping on something. And just know that people, even experienced writers, will often send you lists of solutions.
Yeah.
But you need to learn how to work backwards from that and try to find the problems. And then you have to learn how to hear your own voice in whether you agree with that those are problems or not. Sometimes people have a problem with a story, but that's just because they're not like you and they think this story is something that it's not, or they want it to be something that it's not. And you have to be able to know, that's not a problem. That's actually a feature.
Yeah. Or sometimes too, you go, oh, what they're telling me is a problem is actually a problem that is created by a completely separate problem. And they will never see that because they may not be as experienced of a storyteller as you are. And you go, oh, the problem that they're stating isn't the problem. The problem actually occurs some other time in the story, right? So yeah, that's really, we could do an entire podcast on that, like how to do that. But I'll just give you my fourth one. It's interesting that we both had 4 lessons. My fourth lesson was the importance of, you can call this being adaptable. You can call it having a backup plan. You can call it, whatever you will. I kind of lucked into my backup plan because, as Caleb mentioned, we released a full cast audiobook. We had on the Reclamation Society, which is the production company that Nathan and I operate. It's a nonprofit, so nobody owns it. But the nonprofit production company that we operate, we had a goal. Our vision on our books was to, by 2025, have a feature film. And 2020 really showed that we, as a production company, we're probably focused on the wrong things, because we constantly fight this battle of, should we be a storytelling company and then work with other production companies to sort of make sure that we tell the right stories, or do we go full production company and control everything? And what became very apparent to us in 2020 was that as these stacks and stacks of projects in Hollywood are occurring, it's going to be, I think, this is just my personal assessment, especially for people who have not been of experience in Hollywood, which we don't, it's going to be harder and harder to not create independent films, but get into big budget production schedules, because everybody has shifted their production schedule back. So it's not to say your movie won't get made, but chances are, unless it's like something completely mind-blowing, it won't get to the front of that pile, right? Like they'll go through all of the other ones that they have in their hopper of products. And I'm not saying you shouldn't write film. I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of that kind of stuff. I'm just saying having a backup plan that says, well, if I can't get through a traditional storytelling source, what's my backup plan? Because I still have to tell stories, right? So if you can't do movies, are you going to do full cast audiobooks? That's what we're going to do, right? We're going to say, hey, look, let's not concentrate on the short films, and let's not concentrate on the feature film aspects of the Reclamation Society. Let's instead focus our efforts on something that not as many people are doing. Let's instead focus our efforts on something that we're ahead of the game because we've done something that other people have not done yet. And what if we just make our plan to do more of that and to get better at that and to like shrink our vision instead of, because we'll expand the vision one day, but and we'll talk about this as this may be a good transition into goal setting, but having a vision doesn't mean you have to have like, here's my 5-year vision, and if I can't achieve that, then it's no good. Have a 1-year vision, a 3-year vision, a 5-year vision, a 10-year vision, and then understand how to work towards and adapt towards what you're trying to aim for. I think it's really important. So having the ability to, as a writer, to figure out how you're going to adapt to still be able to do what you are called to do in terms of telling stories, I think is important, because a year like 2020 can come along and change everything. Or a year could come along where everything gets completely upended, and now you're at the front of the pile because now you've got the positive experience instead of the negative experience. Now, how do you change? If you're stuck in a rut of what you were doing before, you can't adapt to the awesome new thing, then you're in trouble. So just kind of looking at the lay of the land to have, multiple plans, backup plans, I think is a positive thing to do as a storyteller.
Yeah, a personal example from my 2020 is that at the end of 2019, I wrote 3 short stories, prose short stories. And then in 2020, I wrote 7 and began a number of others.
Nice.
And the reason that I leaned more into that is because in a pandemic world where things like production and publishing are less certain, I still moved forward in both comics and film.
Right.
But I wanted to add to my portfolio something that I could just send straight to readers. I can directly connect stories to people, because if I find myself if I have something that goes into production as a comic series, but maybe it's going to take 2 years to come out, or the film that I had that came out this year, I wrote 3 years earlier. And in the midst of all of that, it's nice to have just things you can put into the world that people can interact with. And so that was why that number went up for me in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of thing that I think you don't need to be a producer to adapt to the marketplace. In fact, writers should always be thinking about who they're writing for, how those people are ingesting stories, why those people are ingesting stories, and how to make an impact in those people's lives, right? So knowing what's going on with your audience, I would probably write a story. Well, the sequel that we have to Death of a Bounty Hunter, I've started writing already, and it's for people who are struggling with polarization because guess what? This is the environment we find ourselves in. So I think that it's really important to do that. Before we jump into goal setting, which we will do, I did want to point out that you can check out 2020. Caleb he co-wrote a movie called the Mongolian Connection. I almost always want to call it the Mandalorian Connection, just because it's just right. The 2 words are interspersed in my head. The Mongolian Connection, which is available on Amazon Prime right now. So if you have Amazon Prime, you don't even have to pay for it. It's like free. Just go watch it. But you can also rent it on some of the other platforms as well, including, I believe, iTunes and some of the others. I've seen it. I highly recommend it. It's a really cool film, and it shows you kind of. And by the way, you should watch it, and then you should go watch our conversation about it on this channel, because I think it's really fun. If you're a writer, it's really fun to understand better the process of how these things get done, because I think it helps you, one, deal with the final products, because the final product is almost never what you as a writer did. But also it tells you how you can influence the final product better. So just really quick example. In that conversation, Drew, the director and co-writer, talks about how adaptive and how quick Caleb was to work on scenes that were going to be filmed the next day. And so he would send something to Caleb and say, this scene isn't really quite where we want it to be. And Caleb would write the scene and then send it back. And those are things that I don't think, a lot of writers, again, especially if you come from a prose background, you think, I'm going to do it all. And then I hand it off and they just do what I said, right? It's not how it works, actually. So it's a really great conversation about that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was Death of a Bounty Hunter. So Death of a Bounty Hunter is available as a novel. It's also available as an audiobook. The audiobook's coming out chapter by chapter because it just takes so much production work to do all the editing. In fact, I just got an email from my editor just now talking about like when he's going to get me files. But the other thing I wanted to mention about Death of a Bounty Hunter, we were really, really excited about this. At the tail end of 2020, actually mid 2020, I was on a podcast. Shout out to the Dads That Drink podcast. Those guys had me on because they really liked my first novel, Nathan and I's first novel, Timeslingers. Wow, I can't speak. They really loved Timeslingers. They had me on the show to talk about writing. And after the show was over, he said, you should submit Timeslingers to Screencraft's cinematic book competition, because when I read it, I felt like it was really cinematic. And Nathan and I said, okay, that's cool, but I didn't know much about this contest, and I'm always skeptical about contests. I did submit Timeslingers, but I held off on submitting Death of a Bounty Hunter. Then right before the deadline, I did say, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and submit Death of a Bounty Hunter as well. Last week, shortly after we had our last podcast, so maybe a couple weeks ago, we got notified that it made the quarterfinals of Screencraft's cinematic book competition. And so we're very stoked about that. So go watch The Mongolian Connection. Go check out Death of a Bounty Hunter. You can go to deathofabountyhunter.com and check out, either you can get the novel or you can get the full cast audiobook there. But those are some goals that you don't even, I didn't have a goal to get into the quarterfinals of something, right? But you could say the part of the craft of being a producer is getting the book into more contests. So let's talk about goals. Let's talk about those kinds of goals. Caleb, kick us off. What are some of your writing goals, and what are some of the ways? By the way, I'm going to talk more about how I do goal setting as opposed to what my goals are, because I haven't even worked on them yet. So kick us off. What are some of your thoughts?
I'm going to talk mostly about how to do goal setting too, because my personal goals are not going to be much help to people.
Yeah.
I will share what my goals for 2021 are at the moment. They will change, but just to give you an idea of what it could look like.
Cool.
But really, there's two main things that I haven't set writing goals in a while. And so setting them this year, I was actually doing the past year review was an inspiration to like, whoa, look what I did unintentionally. What if I was intentional? And then also talking about those online workshops, I took an online lecture on thinking big and planning 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year, 1 decade in the future for writers, and it gave me some great stuff to think about. And so I built my goals this year on 2 main principles. And this is the first time I've really built on this specific combination of principles. I tend to lean way into one of them and sometimes forget the other one, or vice versa. But I really tried to find a balanced way to approach this year. And that the 2 principles are fail to success and start easy. So the fail to success means set a goal that you think is probably beyond your ability to do, but it will stretch you, and you'll still end up doing more than if you'd set your goal lower. If you set a goal to, I'm just going to make up a number. You set a goal to write 50 short stories this year, and you don't make it, but you write 35. Like if you had made a goal to write 35, you probably would have written 20.
Yeah.
So you failed, but the failure is a success because it's still 35 stories, right? So Absolutely. Failure to success is one principle so I'm specifically making some goals that I know I'm going to fall short of, but I will still be pleased with the results when I fall short of that, Yeah.
then the other is start easy. And I think this is something that I in particular have problems with. And other writers, you may as well. It sort of really depends on how ambitious a person you are. The more ambitious you are, the harder this is. And that is to start easy. But I've noticed this in the past. I'm sure you've noticed it. And that when you set a goal, and it can be a reasonable goal, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day, 5 days a week. And you do that for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you're feeling good, but then you miss a day. And then it all goes to pot. And not only does that streak disappear, but you basically stop pursuing all your goals for the year because you feel like you've already missed. You've already failed, so why keep going? And right. This happens with New Year's resolutions. This happens with goals of all types, whether you're setting them at the beginning of a year or not. And so this year, what I'm trying to do, I put down what I thought would be a reasonable amount of things for me to do in January and me to do in February. And then I cut them in half because the momentum created by successfully hitting my January goals and successfully hitting my February goals, that momentum is invaluable, and it will inform my ability to hit March or in April. And, because as the year goes, the monthly goals will get more because I'm trying to fail to success, but start out to plan success at the beginning, to pull back what I think I could do, because then not only will I succeed, but I will probably do what I was going to do anyway. Because when I'll have extra time, I'll like, oh, that only took, I gave myself a week to write that. It took me 3 days, and now I have 2 extra days. So what else could I do? But so that's where I'm setting all my goals this year. This sort of this intersection between failure to success and start easy.
That's really, really good. So two thoughts backing up that I would highly recommend. And I spent a lot of time on this actually in 2019. Not so much 2020 was the year where I tried to implement some of these things. The first one is, and this I'm going to use a biblical reference for it, but when there is a lack of a vision, the people perish, right? And what does that mean? It means that you as a writer, or you as somebody who's writing for somebody else, even maybe you're not writing for yourself, maybe you're writing for somebody else. If there's no vision in mind about where you're taking yourself, your career, the organization that you're working for, if there's not this vision that you're aiming toward, you will really feel lost at sea. You will really feel like you are just out there. You're not sure what you're doing. You're not sure why you're doing it. You're not sure how you're making an impact on the world. It's just very difficult. It's very, very difficult to understand what you're aiming toward and why you're aiming toward that. And so what I highly recommend is spend some time before you even set your goals, spend some time thinking about your vision. Now, I'm much better at goals. I'm much, much better at goals. If you told me, Caleb, here's the vision I have, I'd be like, cool, let me help you come up with some goals. I'm not necessarily a visionary, right? The way that other people are, they just go, wow, what could we be in 10 years? We could be this or we could be that. I'm more the guy that like goes, yeah, let's get there. Let's like, these are the things you do to get there. So let's just go do those things and let's adapt here and adapt there. But what was really impactful to me was to look at myself and say, and this is a special shout out to Sean Cannell and the Think Media group, because I went to one of their events. And one of the things that they recommended was, what do you want to be the best in the world at? What is the thing that you want to be best in the world at? And that will tell you a couple things. It can tell you what your vision could actually be, and it can actually tell you what you were actually uniquely gifted to do. Because if I were to say I want to be the best writer in the world, I can guarantee you that I will never achieve that because I'm not the best writer in the world. And I know that, and I understand that is part of the way that I am made. I'm not the best writer in the world, but I do know that I'm very good at telling stories and going about the process of bringing people together and managing those people towards a vision that is the end of the story. And so what I call myself is a storytelling executive. And I go, if you're a storytelling executive, then what is the vision that you personally can accomplish, right? And there are some things that I can't do. I'm not going to be, so would I be the best storytelling executive in the world? Well, probably not. But what if we took that and we said, what if I'm the best storytelling executive in the world pertaining specifically to impactful geek, science fiction, fantasy, comic book stories, and then apply that to a medium like full cast audiobooks? Now you're dealing with a very small percentage of people who you're competing against to be the best in the world at. And if you don't become the best in the world, you'll be one of the 5, right? Like to your point, Caleb. And so I think that if you can, that was really impactful to me, because I tend to not think of myself as what would I want to be the best in the world at, because I'm a type A person and I spend enough time trying to think about how to get to the next stage. And so that was a little bit intimidating for me, because it felt a little bit almost like you could be too prideful. Like, oh, I'm going to say that I'm the best in this thing. Just know that you can't get to be the best in the thing if God has not prompted you in that direction and he's not supplying you with the resources to do it. And even if he supplies you with all of those things, he may not bless you with it, but that's okay, because we're supposed to do it. So go pursue it. So figure out what it is that you were supposed to go pursue, and go pursue that thing. So anyways, I put that out there as one thing, is have a vision for yourself. And then the second thing is, you were saying this, and I think this is really, really important for goal setting and for living out your goals and living out your vision. You said that you're not going to achieve everything you put on paper, right? And you said do some stretch goals and think about failing to succeed. I love failing to succeed. I think that's one of the most important things you can do, actually, because people just tend to just weigh themselves down with failure, when reality is you're just learning how not to succeed. So then do something else. But I learned this concept. I don't remember who this concept came from. It was like a Tim Ferriss type, right? So this podcast is dedicated to Tim Ferriss. I don't think it was him, but it might have been. But they said it's really important that as a human being, you reset to 0. And what they meant was that there are times in life when you're doing really well and you're like, oh yeah, I'm at like a 7, I'm at an 8, I'm approaching 9. But there are a lot of times when you actually take steps backward and you go -1, -2, -3. So maybe you got like a -3 because you had a conversation where someone didn't like your book or didn't like your thing. I think that the concept is reset to 0 as fast as you can. What it means by that is okay, I took a hit, but mentally I need to get myself back to, I'm at 0, which means I can improve from here. If I spend my time trying to walk back from -5 to -4 to -3, I'm wasting time and energy. I need to get back to 0 as fast as possible, back to my norm, and then I need to build on top of that. And I thought that was a really good principle because of how long you can spend in negativity. If your brain goes there and you just wallow in it, you can spend way, way too much time there. It's almost like the concept of, I'm doing all these like spiritual concepts today for some reason. I guess this is what I always do, but it's almost like the concept of repentance, right? Where it's like, if you have had certain failings, repentance doesn't mean, get on your knees and feel sorry for yourself. It literally means turn the other direction, turn the other way. And so you should repent as soon as you possibly can from the thing that you know is negative and go back to the thing that you know is positive. And so I think that's just, I say it's a spiritual thing because reset to 0 is the way the modern day would do it. This is a concept that has been with us for millennia because it's in our spiritual books. And I think it's a really important one. So I love the fact that you brought that up. So that's really, really cool. I only have a couple more things to talk about with goals. What about you?
I've got a couple. I have a reset follow-up. You're talking about reset to 0.
Yes.
One thing that I think is very important for writers as we set our goals is to never let yourself play catch up. If you miss a goal, reset. Don't think, oh, I got to go back and make that up, or don't let yourself do that, because then you will you will spiral and it will spiral, and then you'll be playing catch up and you won't actually be getting anything done. So if you miss a goal, just say, oh, that's okay, starting again today, and then start again. So for example, my goal is to write 15 short stories in the coming year. I wrote 7 last year. And that's a story every 3 weeks with 7 grace weeks thrown in, because I know around the holidays I'm going to miss probably 2 weeks of writing. I know there will be a family vacation at some point. I'll probably get sick, like just giving myself 7 weeks, knowing that at some point I'm just going to miss. But even with that built in, the reason that I have the goal written down as 15 stories and as 1 story every 3 weeks means that if I get 6 weeks into the year and I've only written 1, that's okay. I don't need to play catch up. I just need to write a story in the next 3 weeks. I need to, and so maybe I'll end up with 10 or 12 or 13 at the end of the year, but never try to play catch up. If you miss it, just start over and say, okay, this is today's day 1. I've got 3 weeks to write the next one, something like that.
That's a great practical way of resetting to 0. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I don't even know who's supposed to go right now, but I have another.
It's your turn. It's your turn.
That I think is related to what you were just talking about. And that is, it is relatively easy to get into the top 20th percentile of any skill set. If you want to be in the top 20th percentile of writers in the US, if you spend years studying, and most of all, you spend years creating pages, it's not that hard. But what the problem that we run into, again, this is another place where we sabotage ourselves, is you're like, it was so easy to get here to the 80th percentile. But it's going to take probably that same amount of effort to get from 80 to 90. The effort that took you all the way from 0 to 80, it's going to take that to get you to 90. And when you start getting to like going from the 98th to the 99th percentile, it takes so much more effort. So few people will do it. When you're trying to go from being 5th in the world at something to 1st in the world at something, it's, there's so many factors at play, and it requires so much more work. But I think what happens is we feel like because it was so easy to get to that 80th percentile, we feel like we have somehow messed up, or we're failing because it's taking us so long to get incrementally better from there.
Yeah.
But that's just how learning works. And that's just how excellence works. And that's just, so don't let yourself feel disappointed about that. Just keep making the progress.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. You said you had one more thing too, right?
Yes. And this is something that I learned from another much more experienced writer. He calls it the time of great forgetting. And that is months of May, June, and July. So graduation happens, summer break begins, family vacations. No matter what your goals are at the beginning of the year, it's in May, June, and July when they tend to just sort of evaporate. The time of great forgetting. You just forget that you had a plan for this year.
That's good.
And
good.
Before you know it, it's August, and you're like, whoa, what happened? And when I was hearing him talk about this, I thought back on my past couple of years. I thought back on last year, and it's totally true. Time of great forgetting. I said that I made 96 short story magazine submissions last year. I made probably 75 to 80 of them before June. And then it just all slowed super down over the course during that time of great forgetting. And then you're kind of shaking that off and trying to remember what you were doing in the first place. And then you start to get some more momentum again. But I just thought it was great to have a term for that, to know that it's coming. It happens pretty much every year, no matter what your goals are, what you're trying to do. This time of year, just what you're trying to do just tends to evaporate, become just a little harder to remember, to keep track of, to care about. But having a name for it, just now I can say to myself, oh, I'm entering the time of great forgetting. And I can adjust my goals accordingly. As I've set my goals for the coming year, and I talked about starting easy in January and February, I'm going to go back to easy probably for May, June, and July to get me through that time with some momentum, and then start getting harder again in August, expecting more of myself, as we round the corner into fall. But I just loved that phrase that he had, the time of great forgetting. And when I look back on my life, I realize it's true. It happens every year to me. And so now I have a word for it, and I have an expectation for it, and I can plan for it because I know it's coming.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really good. That is the time of year that's so tough too, because as you transition to the middle of the year, you realize how the year has already shifted, right? Because like when you start the year in January, you're thinking, well, my year is probably going to go like this. But like we saw in 2020, which was when the pandemic got crazy, was in March. You suddenly realize, like, oh, my year is not going to go the way that I thought it was going to. My year, I thought was going to be. I was connected to several people that are on our board or serving our organization that are really critical people that are in Hollywood. And I thought that at the beginning of the year, we might get funding and that we might have to shift not to doing so much audiobook stuff, but shift to doing way more film stuff because of the people that I was going to meet and the people that I was going to be connected to. I knew for a fact I was not going to meet any of those people for sure over Zoom. I'm not going to do that. These are people who, if I told you what their names were, you'd be like, yeah, you would not want to meet them for the first time over Zoom. That's insane. And so there was no guarantee I was going to meet with them, by the way. That was just the intent. We were going to put that forth as a goal. But, and we were connected to them. But I say that because, halfway through in the months you're talking about, May, June, July, you realize everything is not going to happen the way the way I thought it was going to, right? Like, this is just not going to be a thing. So being able to even in that time frame, being able to say, find some space, maybe after that time frame, maybe near the end of that time frame, to say, let me recap and do a mid-year take on what's happened thus far. And do I want to keep doing some of the things that I've been doing, or do I want to switch it up and do things a little different? That's probably a good time of year to do that. Which is a good segue to the last two things that I have. Now, when I call myself a storytelling executive, I should probably put that in instead of writer producer right here. I should probably call myself that. But I'm going to put my executive hat on as opposed to the storytelling hat. From the executive standpoint, I think that there are three main components to goal setting. The first main component I've already talked about, which is setting your vision. Set the vision, because that's how you know that what goals will help you achieve that vision. And by the way, you and I can share the same goals, but you and I probably don't share the same strategy, and you and I probably don't share the same vision. So just recognize that that there are different visions for different people. There are different strategies for different people, but goals can look very similar to everyone. So you can't just look at your goal setting and think, oh, I'm on the right track. Because if you're on the right track with your goals, but you're using the wrong strategy or you don't have the right vision, you're going in the wrong direction. So just know that first and foremost. But you got a vision, then you got these goals. There are three important things, I should say, to goals. The first one is don't set too many. Because a lot of times what people will do is they'll say, I want to accomplish these 10 things. And it's impossible. In fact, there's really good research in science that shows that the minute you add anything beyond a third goal, your chances of achieving any of the other goals drops below 70%. Right? So it's not that you're going to not achieve the fourth goal, that you have a 70% chance of achieving any one of the four goals. And that's a bad percentage. That you're talking about C-level, you're going to do C-level work, right? Or maybe you do A-level work on one of them and then the other ones get Fs. Point being, try to limit your goals. Try to have 1, 2, maybe 3 goals if you have to. And that's been really hard for me because I'm a kind of a let's just do stuff person. I had to, in 2020, I had to give up being on the Story Geeks podcast. Why? Because I had too many goals. I had too many plates spinning. I had too many things I was trying to do. I started this podcast with Caleb. But a lot of that was I needed to get to a place where I was trying to be the storytelling executive, not trying to be the guy who speaks about Marvel and DC stories all the time, right? There was a different vision now, and that vision was not going to be accomplished in the same way. So I had to shift my goals. So then you've got your vision. You have very few goals, hopefully. There are what are called leading and lagging indicators. And now I'm getting really technical with my speech. This is the executive part of things. A lagging indicator is your final measurement, meaning that you were able to. It lags. It lags your ability to what word do I want to use here? When you measure it as already having happened. It lags the measure, right? Lagging indicators are the thing. That's how you would state your goal. You would state, by this date, I want to have written 15 short stories, right? That's your lagging indicator. You need to have leading indicators that tell you whether or not you're going to achieve your lagging indicator. Because if you don't measure leading things, you will never know if you're on track to hit the lagging thing. In other words, you need milestones along the way to be able to know whether or not you're going to get to where you want to get to. Just think of it as you're driving across country. And you say, I want to be across the country in 10 days. Well, if you're not midway through the country by day 5, you're in big trouble, right? So you want to measure along the way. So what you want to do is you want to set your goals. Then you want to set leading indicators for those goals. What is a leading indicator of 15 stories? Well, I want to have that's going to require me to have, let's say it's 16. We'll make it easy. I'm going to need to have 4 stories done in the first quarter, 4 stories done in the second quarter, and it's going to need to keep changing in that way, right? Like I'm going to need to. So of course, each one of those becomes its own lagging indicator at a point. But you know whether or not you're getting to the major lagging indicator for the rest of the year. There are other leading indicators you can have. If I have to have 4 short stories done by the end of the first quarter, then what does it take for me to do a short story? You've already said it. You got to have one every 3 weeks. So I'm going to have 1 short story every 3 weeks. How do you finish a short story in 3 weeks? You got to work on a short story. How many hours does a short story take you? Oh, it takes me 10 hours to write a short story. Okay, where do those 10 hours occur in that 3-week period? And have you given yourself slack time just in case it takes 15 hours that one week? And so you can actually, then you've got to say, how do I carve out 10 hours of a week? Well, then you got to go, I'm going to set aside these 10 hours on my calendar, because if I set aside 7 to 9 every single morning, it only takes me 5 days a week to reach 10 hours. Awesome. Now you have a plan. So if you can look at things in terms of, here's your vision, here's your goal. Don't have too many goals. Have few goals. By the way, if you achieve your goals early, then you get a new goal. So then it gives you incentive to finish your goals early. And then have leading indicators that can help you figure out if you're on track to finish the thing that you want to finish. So that's all I will say. That's a lot.
Well, that's a great example of leading indicators. And I heard this in a podcast with Jim Collins, the guy who wrote Good to Great, and a number of other books like that.
Yeah.
And he when his books became a success, it became very easy for him to just appear on podcasts or to go speak or to do this, that. And he realized that the more he did that, the less he was writing. So he was becoming the actual writing, the thing that made him successful, was being killed by the success that it created. And you can see that happen in a lot of different fields. You've seen that happen to people, and you've probably felt it yourself when something was going well. So he started keeping track on his whiteboard how much he had written, how many words he had written the previous week. And so there was 2 numbers up on the whiteboard. It was how many I've written so far 3 numbers. How many I've written so far this week? How many I wrote last week? And then below that was how many words will I have written 6 months from now if the past 26 weeks are averaged? So he would average the past 26 weeks and see, and if that number, that 6-month average, started dropping, then he knew that he needed to pick up what he was doing in any given week to get back, to the trajectory. I thought that was a great, just simple but visual way of doing a leading indicator. Very, very good example. And not only that, but it also points out how resetting to 0 is really important along the way. So all these concepts, so what is his vision? To write another book, right? So if his vision is to write another book, then his goals are related to getting that book finished. So if he needs to get that book finished, now he's looking at leading indicators that help him get that book finished along the way, and he's having to reset to 0, because if he spends all his time worrying about the fact that last week I didn't write enough,
well, then he's not writing, right? So he's got to reset to zero, get back to the writing process that gets him to the next stage. So I think that's a really good example because it kind of plays everything out as it goes. Any other thoughts about
I have
goals?
one that came up as you were speaking, and I actually don't know. I don't know why this came up. I think you know how thoughts work. I don't know where it came from. In Dune, there's the saying that fear is the mind killer. Pretty famous quote from what's maybe considered the best science fiction novel of all time. You'll hear it quoted by like business people who've never read Dune or whatever. Fear is the mind killer, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna adapt that and say comparison is the success killer. If you try to compare your goals and and what you're producing and your process with someone else, you are you're guaranteeing failure for yourself.
Yeah.
So make your goals within a vacuum of you, meaning like with how I work in the world, how I write, and the types of things I want to do. What are my goals? And then hit those goals. And don't worry if you have a friend who is, I've had friends who entered comics after I did and are much more successful now than I am. But I'm okay with that because there's at various points, there's different things that we have wanted out of our writing career. And, like it just gives me, I've had opportunities to write a film and to do all these other sort of things, which affects my ability to do those other things. But if I was comparing myself, first of all, you don't even know what's going on inside someone. Maybe they're really productive, but they're miserable. And maybe the reason they're productive is because they're trying to cover up some like horrible pain in their life. And they're just doing this like, la, 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 la. I'm just going to keep writing stories because then I don't have to think about this, and so you look at the productivity and you think, oh, that's positive. That's great. But maybe what that really is a symptom that their marriage is falling apart. And, so you just you don't know enough about the factors behind what's going on with someone else, and you're not them. Yeah. The only one who can be successful at being you is you. And that's the only way you can be successful. You can never successfully be someone else. So I would just say comparison is the success killer when you're setting your goals.
Oh, I could not agree with that more. And that's why it's so important that you understand what your specific vision and what your specific calling is. And by the way, I was part of an event, and there was a church planter at that event. He was really a interesting thinker. And he told me, he goes, every single person has a purpose. He's very vehement about this. Everybody has a purpose, and everyone's purpose is unique to them, and they are gifted in that way. And I thought about that for a long time, because as I was trying to think about what my purpose was, it became clear to me, at least my understanding of it right now, which I'm sure will change. So you and I always talk about this. Our understanding changes over time. But the point I was trying to make was my purpose became clearer. But what I realized was that we're not always called in the same way toward the same things, but we can always try and live out our purpose. So maybe you're not a famous writer yet. But you feel like you're called to do it. You feel like that's part of what your purpose is. Sometimes you're living out your purpose in a way that you're called to something for a time. And so if you feel like you're called to comics, and it's like, yeah, I'm called to comics, but you're not famous in comics, then you set up some goals that you can try to achieve those things. But don't forget that you can utilize what you are supposed to do because of your purpose. You can utilize that today, even in whatever. Maybe you're telling stories to your coworkers at the grocery store you work at, because they need those stories today. And now today you're fulfilling your purpose as a storyteller, as an oral storyteller, not as a comic book writer, right? So yeah, I think that you're 100% right. Comparison assumes that we're all on the same journey, and that we all have the same vision, and that we all have the same purpose, and that therefore, if I have the same purpose and if they have the same purpose and we have the same vision, now I'm in direct competition with these people. But that's completely ridiculous. Take it from an executive standpoint. whenever I go out and try to find people to contribute to the vision of what the Reclamation Society is trying to do, I am not looking for the same person over and over and over. That'd be stupid. Like, I'm looking for different people who bring different things to the organization for different purposes, for different reasons, what they're called to, what they're passionate about. And so, so I would say, if you're going to spend time, don't spend time in comparison in terms of what you've accomplished goal-wise. Spend time in comparison that would say instead introspection as a form of comparison, to say what's different about them and what are they uniquely gifted in, so that I can see Caleb as a completely gifted, awesome person and want to see him achieve whatever he needs to achieve, despite whatever I need to achieve. That's really, I think, the best possible way that we can engage with one another. Because then it makes things like collaboration so much easier, right? Like, if I know what I'm supposed to be and I know what Caleb's supposed to be, then I'm saying, for example, I'll give you a perfect example, real life example. We at some point in time, I will probably turn to Caleb as a part of our storytelling brain trust and say to Caleb, hey, Caleb, would you like to write a full cast audiobook or portion of a full cast audiobook for us? Now, I'll have a conversation with Caleb and say, Caleb, what are some of your goals in doing something like that? And what do you want? Do you want to move into directing? Is that part of your vision, or is that not part of your vision? Do you want to just stick to the writing? And what I will try and do is I'll try and form a team around Caleb that can get him the most possible resources towards achieving what he wants to achieve in that output, as opposed to me thinking to myself, well, I'm going to compare myself to Caleb, and is he really going to do a better job than I would do of writing the full-cast audiobook? That would be completely ludicrous, because we're going to serve different roles and different purposes in that process. So I think sometimes we can get caught up in our own like thought patterns, and if we just take a step back and look at it in terms of, well, what vision do they have? What vision do I have? What are we being called to? It's a much healthier perspective, given what you're just talking about.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point that follows on some of the things we talked about earlier about notes giving and conversation and community with other writers. When we talked about receiving notes, but when you're trying to give another writer notes or suggestions, we talked about how try to point out the problems, don't give them a list of solutions. In fact, I'm going to take the maybe out of that sentence. Try to just point out the problems, don't give them a list of solutions. But you need to go a step beyond that, which is you need to figure out, what are they doing and what are the problems with them trying to get where they're going? Because we have a tendency to point out the problems. If we were taking that book somewhere, these are the problems that we would have with it. But we're not the ones taking that book somewhere. We're not the ones taking that script somewhere. They are taking it somewhere. So first you need to try to look for, where are they taking it? And then what are the problems that are maybe keeping them from that? Not what are the problems that are keeping them from making the version of the story I would make. But
that's so good. And we have a comment as we're getting ready to close this out. We have a comment, which is awesome. A healthy dose of Fran says, networking is something I've learned a lot about recently. Build a relationship for yourself and for others will help boost everyone. We love supporting others' careers. That is such a good way of putting it, right? So when you're going to network, don't think about networking as a way for you to get ahead. As Caleb just said, think about it as a way for you to help somebody else get ahead. And that's such a gift to give to somebody, right? That's such a gift to be able to say, I'm going to help you out today, especially in places that are really competitive. Neither one of us is in LA right now, but LA is a crazy competitive place.
Don't worry about coming in late, Healthy Dose of Fran, because this will be available afterwards. We're glad that you weighed in.
Yeah.
But I will say, I have a friend, Shun Li Fong, and he runs Greenhouse Productions, a little group in Los Angeles. And he put it really well for me once, because we were having a conversation. This is when I was beginning the part of my day job, which is building community for creatives, And so I was going around talking to people who were already building successful communities with creatives and just trying to learn from them about it. And one thing that he told me is, he's like, when people come to Greenhouse, we tell them
this is the one place you don't have to worry about your career. Stop worrying about your career, because we're all going to worry about your career. So when you come in here, you can have relief, because we carry so much pressure to create some sort of future for ourselves. And what you really want out of community with others is to be able to walk into a space where they will think about that for you. It's like, like, what future do they see? What potential do they see? Who could they connect you to? What door could they open for you? And so that is, since hearing that from him, that is my mindset when I think I don't even like the word networking, because it's got so many self-oriented connotations. Like I'm meeting people for my own benefit, but it's a useful word. I don't have a better word to replace it. But I try to think of it as, what, I am here. I'm in this space to steward everyone else's career. I'm here to help everyone else get up another step. And when you have a group of people who are all thinking like that, it's just incredibly life-giving. And a lot of actual work can come out of an environment like that. Getting each other jobs, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Great comment, Healthy Dose, man. That was a fantastic comment. Well, I think that's it for today's show, right, Caleb? You got anything else? We good?
I think I'm going to list what my goals are for 2021.
Oh, yeah. Let's hear that.
Just mention a little bit of my thinking behind each of them. Again, because these goals are not going to be anyone else's goals, but the thoughts behind them might be helpful as people are sitting down and trying to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my first goal, and this is general, is 40 new story ideas. And by that, I mean, I have these little 1 to 5 sentence story like concepts that I and then this past year, I came up with probably 30 of them. And many of those got turned into actual stories that got sent out or turned into film treatments or what have you. And so my goal this year is to do 10 more, 40 story ideas, which is really about 40 days worth of work, because you're just sitting down and thinking, okay, what would be something cool? And maybe you give yourself some parameters. Like I want to tell a romance story. What would a Western idea be? What if I wanted to do space opera? What if I wanted to do hard sci-fi? What if I wanted to do, and I'll tell you the main way that I generate ideas is I think of them as responses. So I will go out and consume other stories, and then I'll read something and I'm like, I wish they had done this. Or after reading those first 3 paragraphs, I thought the story was going to go in this direction and it didn't. So sometimes it's like that. It's like an actual, but then sometimes it's just sort of like, what? That story was great. I would love to work in that genre. I've never written anything in that genre. I'm going to go try to come up with an idea in that genre. Or that story left me with a feeling that I would love to try to leave someone else with. Can I come up with a story idea that could leave someone with that same feeling? So there's a lot of ways you can respond to something, but I a lot of times I'll read a short story, I'll watch a movie, I'll pick up a book or a comic, and then I'll just look for some little hook in there somewhere, something I liked or didn't like or something I responded to, and then I will, or just the genre or anything like that, and then I'll sit down, because it's so much easier to sit down and try to come up with an idea for a Western than to sit down and come up with an idea. It's so much easier to sit down and come up with an idea for something that will feel bittersweet than it is to just come up with an idea. On and on. So 40 story ideas, 15 stories. We've already talked about that. 1 every 3 weeks, 7 grace weeks, because I know I'm not going to hit 1 every 3 weeks, because that's not how life works. And 100 submissions. Like I said, I made 96 submissions last year, so my goal is really only 4 more. But because I hit 96, really doing it 6 months of the year last year. I'm sure I'll go far beyond 100, but that's the goal. I'm just shooting for 100. Again, starting easy to get that momentum. And then 1 comic script. I'm co-writing a 4-issue comic miniseries, and 3 of the issues are written. So we just need 1 more, and it's up to me to write the first draft of that one. And so that I want to make 13 more comics pitches. I made 13 this past year, actually. So I want to make 13 more. I want to launch my first Kickstarter.
I have a comic property that I'm working with the artist, and we're going to kickstart it because it's weird and publishers don't know what to do with it. And so a first Kickstarter. And then a possibility is that if one of those 13 pitches that I sent out last fall becomes a series, then I'll have to write probably 4 issues of that. So if I have to do that, it's those 7 grace weeks that I gave myself for writing the 15 stories. Those will get borrowed to use, to write 4 comic scripts. There are 2 nonfiction books that I want to finish, and both of them there's already substantial progress on. Like, one of them is the book I wrote 20,000 words on last year, and one of them, not quite a word count, but a similar level of progress. And then I want to write 2 screenplays, which, that it takes me about a month to write a screenplay, and I already have the treatments because I wrote 3 treatments last year. And yeah, so that's just sort of just trying to tie together some of my thinking about what I did this past year and what I'm doing this year, why I'm choosing to do this, what this looks like. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's not going to help people to know what my goals are, but it might help you to know how I got to them.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. Now, the storytelling executive part of me wants to ask you a specific question and just see how you respond to it. And that is, in the event that you cannot accomplish all of that, have you prioritized those goals into, these are my highest priority things and these are lower priority things? Do you know how you would shift given an adaptation to the marketplace or an adaptation to how people are like, for example, you said, like, if any of those scripts get picked up, you know what your priorities are in terms of what those goals look like?
Yes, but not on the list. Like, I don't have, this is number 1 for this year, this is number 2 for this year, this is number 3 for this year. It's by the month. So I sat down and I looked at January and I said, I looked at the things I wanted to get done in January, and then the ones that feel more important, I put earlier in the month, because if they take longer or whatever, they will still get done. And I did the same thing for February, and I did the same thing for March. And at the end of January, I'm going to look at February, and I'll probably shuffle it around depending on where I am at that point and what I got done the previous month. And at the end of February, I'll do the same thing. So that's sort of how I handle it, because my priority is just to make sure that I am producing writing every week. And I work in a lot of different fields. I'm adding nonfiction in this coming year, but I just love writing. And if I'm making progress in any of those, I'm going to be happy. Yeah. So I just sort of each month, I just do a check with myself. What feels most important to me now, or maybe what opportunities have opened up since I made these goals, or what has changed, or what do I feel ready to write? Because sometimes you plan for something and then you get to the day when you're supposed to start it, and you're like, I'm not ready to write this yet. I don't, my brain is just not ready to write this one, and so then you have to switch it out. So that's sort of how I think about it.
That's cool. Yeah, I think as long as you know, because we've already talked about resetting to 0. We've already talked about all of those things. The last thing that you would look at in goal setting is which ones are my priorities. And so you are addressing your priorities on a monthly basis and saying, okay, I need to adapt to what is being presented to me by my surroundings, my environment, right? Which I think is really, really healthy. And then that way you can know, like, how are my goals stacking up? And do I need to change them? And so there's always this process of adaptation. I in my day job, in addition to the Reclamation Society, I picked up another a day job where I am the VP of Marketing Ops for a company. And I work with a lot of clients where, I'm asking them, well, what are your goals and your priorities? And some of, like, the tech clients that we work with, those change on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, because they need to adapt to their environment, because their environment changes so fast. And I think there's a good lesson to be learned there, that as long as you're still trying to achieve your vision, as long as you're still trying to live out your purpose and try to live into your calling, and you set that vision for yourself, adaptation is great. I think that's fantastic.
And I should say the main goal is to write 6 days a week. That's actually my only goal of the year. What I just listed is sort of the portfolio of things that I could spend that time and word count on. Yeah. But that will shift. the goal is just to always be producing. So, finishing a comic script and then deciding, what, I think next it's going to be a short story, and then going into that, and then saying, okay, it's time to start that screenplay, or I need to get out of fiction for a while, so let me work on the nonfiction. All of that, because I'm a muse, that can be a very day-to-day, in the moment, knowing what I'm supposed to work on today. And so I would like at the end of the year to have all those things done, but that will change. What won't change is that I want to be producing words 6 days a week.
Yeah, and you're hearing a storytelling executive who's geared as a mechanic talk to a muse. So fantastic. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and end the podcast there. We've done an hour and 40 minutes. That's pretty awesome. And special thanks to A Healthy Dose of Fran, the YouTube channel, A Healthy Dose of Fran. Thanks for submitting a question. Like we said before, we're recording these live, so you can show up, ask us questions on either Facebook, on our Facebook page, the Reclamation Society's Facebook page, or you can go over to YouTube and leave us a comment there. If you want to still contribute to the show in some way, shape, or form, even if you want to run your goals by us and say, hey, what do you think of these goals? Shoot us an email, go into the Story Geeks Facebook group, go onto the Reclamation Society Facebook page, and leave us a comment with those, and we can go back and address them in the next show, which I don't know if we have a topic for the next show yet. So
we don't. So it's wide open. Send us an idea, people.
Yeah, exactly. But that is it for today's show. Don't forget to check out Death of a Bounty Hunter at deathofabountyhunter.com and The Mongolian Connection. And if you do check those out, let us know what you think. If you're going to send us a comment anyways, just tack on like, oh yeah, I read Death of a Bounty Hunter and I could not stand it. No, please don't do that. But also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. You can subscribe right now on YouTube, or on your preferred podcast provider, subscribe to the Story Geeks podcast. So on YouTube, we're the Fantasy Storytelling Reclamation Society channel, and the podcast channel's name is The Story Geeks. Why are they different? That's a long and complex story that I don't need to go into right now. But thanks for listening, and as always, question everything and always seek the truth. And quickly, special thanks to our monthly supporters. Here are some awesome supporters who support us at $5 a month or more: Adam Vargas, Justin Weaver, Mary Baldwin, Wade Johnson, Jim Baldwin, Kimberly Lujo, Monty Thigpen, Nick Prokop, and Connie Mel. We appreciate all of our supporters, even those we haven't mentioned by name. Please consider supporting us, even if it's only a couple dollars a month. Learn more at thestorygeeks.com. Any last lingering things you want to throw out there, Caleb?
No, other than just to remind you that if you miss a goal, just start over. Just start over. Don't let yourself carry. Don't give yourself weight to carry that you don't need.
Exactly. Fantastic way to end the podcast. Thanks again, Caleb. Always good to talk to you, and we'll catch you guys in 2 weeks, same time on this channel, and then it'll be on the Story Geek podcast feed later on. Talk to you guys later.